Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's VetNet session. My name is Michelle, and I'm the volunteer manager here at Hire Heroes USA. I've got one of our fabulous volunteers, Mark, with me today, and we're doing a Q&A session. Mark is a retired professional from Boeing, so we're really excited to pick his mind today about the aerospace industry and what the application process looks like, interview process looks like. So we'll be covering all of that today. But before we get started, I'd like to take a few minutes just to talk about Hire Heroes USA and VetNet and what we're doing here. So Hire Heroes USA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We offer our services free of charge to all U.S. military veterans and their spouses. And essentially what we do is offer a personalized employment training service. So we help you from resume writing, cover letter writing, application, salary negotiation, interview preparation, basically anything that pertains to the job search. We're here to help you through every step of the process. We're here to support you and provide guidance and just keep you encouraged, because I think we all know that the job search process can be kind of defeating sometimes, and you can always use someone in your corner. So that's what we're here to do. And we've got fabulous volunteers like Mark who are here to help as well, who've got years of experience in a particular industry or field, and they also work with our clients one-on-one in addition to these VetNet sessions to help with interview preparation and questions that you might have about the industry that you want to get into, a particular company or a particular position. So if you're not registered for our services, please visit hireheroesusa.org. You can also email me. We've got a weekly registration that's open up. Again, all of our services are offered free of charge to veterans and their spouses. So in terms of VetNet, this is a partnership that we do in conjunction with Google and then the Institute for Veterans and Military Families out of Syracuse University. We do bi-weekly classes on items, subjects pertaining to the job search. Normally it's Hire Heroes USA staff that teach the classes, everything from resume writing, what to do in an interview, how to set up your LinkedIn page, and they're there to answer personal questions as well. Occasionally, we do these Q&A sessions with a volunteer or a guest speaker from our volunteer forces or just contacts that we have, and specifically from a targeted industry. So today, again, Mark is from Boeing, so we're going to be talking about aerospace, defense contractors, that kind of thing. So again, we're looking forward to a very lively VetNet session today, and I'm going to toss the floor over to Mark so he can do a short introduction about himself and give you guys some background about his professional life.
Okay, well, thanks, Michelle, and appreciate the opportunity to work with Hire Heroes on this. As Michelle indicated, I just recently retired. I retired April 1st from the Boeing company. I actually spent 27 years there. And surprisingly, if you look at some of the my colleagues and cohorts that I worked with throughout the years, a lot of them are in the 30 to 35 year range. I actually even retired somebody that was with Boeing for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
50 years. So you've got within the company just this rich experience of people who are true professionals that love what they do. I worked on the defense side for most of my career. I spent a little time doing some corporate stuff that actually got me to work a little bit more with Boeing Commercial and understand their business. But primarily I was on the defense side, and actually I was in government relations for a while, because there's a lot on the defense side where you're interacting with the U.S. government, particularly in my particular area, which was international business. So Boeing global sales for military equipment are roughly about 35% of their revenue, or 30% of the revenues that come into them. I spent most of my career mostly in Asia Pacific, which was roughly about half of what we did in terms of military business overseas, but also did stints in the Middle East, and finally finished up in Europe doing a little bit of work in London, and lived in London for several years. But the experience was varied throughout the Boeing company. Got a chance to meet a lot of great people. at the Boeing company. And I have to say that the one thing I could always count on, whether it was my function or another business unit, I always could get help where I needed it. Michelle, that's probably what, in terms of intro, that's what I've got.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Mark. Just gives our viewers a little background as to where you're coming from, and obviously years of experience, and you're well qualified to talk about the topics that we're going to be covering today. So for simplicity's sake, I've got a few questions that our staff members have put together at Hire Heroes USA. Most of our staff members work with clients on a day-to-day basis, and they've helped hundreds of people go through their job search, so they've got their own questions in terms of the aerospace industry and working for defense contractors. So I can run through a few of those. For those of you that are viewing, thank you so much for participating. We're really excited that you're here, and we definitely want you to have the opportunity to ask your personal questions as well. So we'll save those for the end unless someone has a burning.
Uh-oh. Michelle, I lost you. I don't know if you had the other guys, you lost her as well. I see you guys.
Still have her, so. Or not,
Okay.
her. I can see her picture down.
Well, let's see if Michelle comes back up again. I know she was having some issues here. Michelle, you're back up.
Hi guys, sorry about that.
Yeah, there you go.
Gotta love computers, right? So anyway, we're going to run through some of these questions, and if you've got a burning question that you just need to ask, feel free to type it in the chat box on the side. It's one of the apps that you can add as part of the Hangout, and we'll make sure to get to it. Otherwise, we'll just save them for the end. So thank you guys for your patience. And again, really excited that you're all here. So I think for my first and biggest question is, Mark, if you could talk a little bit about the hiring process at Boeing, and I know it kind of differs based on what position they're going into and what sector of the company they're going into, but just generally speaking, what does the interview process look like and the hiring process in general?
Well, the first thing I would say to particularly the guys that are on the chat is that it's a lengthy process. And I'd imagine, quite frankly, in aerospace, whether it's a Raytheon or a Lockheed Martin, it's probably the same. And a lot of it is just because there are so many different gates that you have to go through. I mean, generally speaking, if you're interested in coming with the Boeing company, first, get on the website. And if you go onto the general website, you can actually type in about employment opportunities, and whether it's commercial or defense, you'll see things pop up. Generally what it is are the recs that are put out there. The recs are put out, and it depends on, the hiring manager's got a, he can have anything from 10 days to 30 days, depending on what he wants to put in there in terms of requirements to start looking at how he's going to fill out the rec. Generally, what they do at the Boeing company, it's in my experience was there's no such thing as somebody just clicks their fingers and they just start hiring people. It's kind of a collaborative process. It's not only are you, I was a vice president interfacing with the human resources folks, you were also interfacing with other functions. So it could be people in supply chain, it could be people in legal, it also could be with the programs or the business unit. And generally what you are trying to achieve in any of these hirings, because it is, when you look at how Boeing looks at that, it's a long-term investment. That's what you're doing. You're investing in somebody. You want to get the right candidate. I think some people get a little jaded in terms of thinking that everything's an inside job in terms of some of these recs. I can tell you that actually I always looked, as clearly I would look at what I would call the individuals from within the company as possible candidates, but I would have been remiss if I didn't go outside and look outside. And quite frankly, we had a pretty good record of hiring people from the outside. One, The things I was looking for was, particularly in my case, when I was looking at resumes, let me see the guys, who the background of the person, and if there is a fit. Let me see what their leadership skills look like, and let me see what they can do in terms of problem solving. Usually, with a lot of people, there's nobody that ever comes up and you go, "Wow, that guy's just the ideal fit." That just doesn't happen. So you usually get. You might get 100 resumes. You probably whittle it down, as quickly as you can to probably, let's say, anywhere from 5 to 10. I used to, at least at my level, used to try to keep it to about 5 or 6 people that I was interviewing. The interview process at Boeing that we went through was it was very regimented in terms of we had specific questions we would ask. They were all the same questions to all the candidates. So I would normally have somebody on the interview panel, was just not me. It might be somebody from my team. It usually was always somebody from human resources, and it could be somebody from the business unit or somewhere else. And we would ask the same questions. We might come up with 7 questions prior to the interview that we all agreed on. And then if there are 5 candidates, we would ask them we'd ask them all the same questions. We would score them on those, how they answered the questions. The interview process was very, very important. And Michelle, in a couple cases where I have talked to some individuals that are looking to go out in aerospace and we're looking for a tip, I always said the biggest tip I gave people that were doing an interview, it gets back to the problem-solving thing. In any specific question, I always was looking for basically set me a scenario in your experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be job experience. It could be something from the military. It didn't have to be something out of the private sector where you had a problem, you looked at possible solution sets, you took some action, and then what you did is this is how you measured whether it was successful or not. Doesn't necessarily have to be successful every time. But what you're showing me is the thought process as you're going through it. And it gets back to what, I think most of us in Boeing were always looking for were people that were solving problems. And that you were somebody, whether you were going to be in this particular job for a year or 2, chances are, if you were successful, we were going to move you on after 2 to 3 years. And you were going to go probably into an entirely different area. And that's how we grow people over there, and that's why that's why you have people that are still there 35 years, later, because they've had a rich variety of experiences. One other thing I did want to mention that comes up, I think a lot of people, and it's a tip for you guys as vets, go on to like LinkedIn or things like that. You probably got other networks. Kind of type in vets at Boeing or something like that. Usually, and this was a tip from one of the HR guys that I talked to prior to this interview, he said, if you do find vets at Boeing, and believe me, trust me, there's a lot of them because I've worked with a lot of them. They may be in that particular function. They may know somebody in that particular function. They may know somebody in that particular business unit. If anything, they may say, I don't know anything, but let me do a little research for you. They'll give you usually some pretty valuable advice. They won't make an in for you, but they will give you, I think, very good advice.
That's a great point, Mark, and just shows the value of networking in general, regardless of the industry that you're interested in, the importance of making those connections. And as military veterans, you kind of already have this established connection with someone who is a veteran working in a company. So that's a great piece of advice, especially as you're trying to make your way into these larger companies where they're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants for positions. It's very competitive. So use every resource you have.
Yeah, and one other thing I did want to mention, Michelle.
Sure.
An important point on resumes, because I don't know if we were going to bring this up later or not, but here's another, I think, a very valuable tip I did get from Human Resources yesterday when I spoke to them. I said, in the Boeing company, you can submit as many resumes as you want. But what their point being, don't submit the same resume for the same standard resume you've got for every particular job. Take the time to take your resume. If it's a supply chain job, you may want to tailor it towards that. If it's a sales job, you might want to look at it a little differently. Or if it's at program management, take a look at the skills you've developed in your experience, and particularly, like I said, from the military, where you've just got this rigid experience, and tailor it towards the particular job. I think a lot of people just take the same resume, look at 50 different recs, and throw out the same resume, and chances are it ends up at the bottom of the pile. Make sure that you got something in there where the person that's looking at it, because he's looking at tons of these things, is going, oh, this guy's interesting. Because once you get put into that second pile of resumes, then you've got a darn good chance of that you're going to get whittled down in terms of actually getting an interview.
That's another great point, Mark, and it actually segues really well to a question that we've already received and you've touched on it already. His question was, how do you, before you get to the interview process, obviously you have to get through a lot of filters, some of them being computerized. You're not even submitting your resume to a human. It's a computer software program that's going to scan your resume and look for keywords and things. So Brian's question is, how do you get to the hiring manager's desk? So that's a really great question, Brian, and certainly a foundational one if you are going to move forward in the job search process. Mark brought up a great point about making sure you're tailoring your resume for every single application that you're putting out there, even if it's with the same company, because the hiring managers do notice whether or not you've been tailoring that resume, and it really shows the dedication and the commitment of the applicant, whether or not they took the time to really scan the job description, look at what the responsibilities were and how that differed from this other application they put in. And that also links up to the importance of really taking keywords from the job description and then putting them in your resume. Many times when software programs are scanning the hundreds or thousands of applications, they're scanning for those keywords to make sure that the final pile that gets put into the HR person or the hiring manager, that those are as relevant as possible. So there are a lot of tips and tricks to, making sure your resume is going to get past the computer and get in front of a human being. We actually do a VetNet session specifically on resumes, so I would encourage you to tune back in because the principles we talk about in that class are applicable for basically any major corporation that you're going to be applying to. Also, if you're not a candidate or a client from Hire Heroes USA, I'd also encourage you to sign up for our services because we can help you craft a resume that will get past those scanners. So if you've got follow-up questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box.
Let me go back and do a little foot stomping on the whole networking thing too. Oh. So if you do have contacts within a company or if you were to go into LinkedIn and all of a sudden you see, oh, well, this guy's an Army guy who's at Boeing, and he looks like he came out of the same battalion I did or something like that, or there's something there. It's worth trying to just get a hold of that guy and say, hey, I just got a question about something and just want to know a little bit more about the process. It's surprising how many times somebody like that will say, well, let me, by the way, I do know somebody over in that area. Let me give them a call. And a lot of times what they'll do is either call you back and say, well, this is don't bother because they've already got this thing pretty much nailed down. It's 5 days. They've got 3 internal candidates. You're kind of wasting your time. Or he's going to look at it and say, oh, no, actually, this is open. And, and usually they'll take the extra step to probably point out to an HR folk or somebody in the program, hey, by the way, I talked to this guy, he seemed pretty good. Could you at least flag his resume? And and then usually that does get you, that little extra effort might get you back in that pile where you are then being considered.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we definitely encourage the importance of networking here at Hire Heroes, and I think it was mentioned just the other day in one of our VetNet classes about how something between 70–75% of the jobs today are obtained through networking, not through, you know, the traditional putting your application in or going to a job fair. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do those things. It just means that networking is extremely important in your success in the job search. So yes, to hammer Mark's point home, you're going to hear about networking over and over in all of our courses just because it's so incredibly important.
Yeah, and thanks for the compliment on the pictures in the background.
Yeah. So Ryan is actually one of our staff members, so I'm super glad you're here, Ryan. If you have any questions that I don't cover, please just jump in whenever you want to. But I have a question that was submitted by one of our other staff members about apprenticeships or internships. That we see a lot of competition for that on our side, on, you know, dealing with candidates who are trying to get into major corporations like that. So Mark, I was wondering if you have any insight as to where to go to find those internships, if there's any tips and tricks to, you know, being competitive for those internships, because I know once you have an opportunity to work.
Yeah. And Boeing does, can you guys
benefit
hear me? Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I was losing you, Michelle. Just in terms of internships and apprenticeships, I would have to say Boeing probably, and they'd be the first ones to admit it needs to do more in it. We do internships primarily through the universities. So we'll, you know, I forget the number, but clearly what we're doing is looking at engineering schools, but also other disciplines. It can be liberal arts and, you know, for communications and things like that, bringing students in who are usually third or fourth year university students, giving them a summer of education at Boeing Company, and then possibly hiring them when they come out of school, depending on the need, etc. Apprenticeships generally here in the United States are controlled by, not controlled, but usually sponsored by the unions. So the machinists are, you know, usually the ones that International Association of Machinists are usually controlling the apprenticeships. But the other thing I was thinking about in terms of the services, probably where we get the guys that have come through the services is actually through the Industrial War College. So we've had not only Americans, we've actually had the UK Industrial War College, where we've actually had folks come through, spend a year with us in a particular capacity. And I think those things, and usually what we do is send somebody from industry over to government in exchange to learn something about the acquisition process and the hoops that people jump through, or into program management. So there's a really, Michelle, kind of what we have. Like I said, I wish we did more on that. Interestingly enough, in the UK, we were really starting to get gung-ho on apprenticeships, just because that has become a great source of where we can find talent over there. And I kind of hope this is something that we do in the future that catches on over here in the United States.
Sure. Yeah, that's great information. Thank you so much for sharing. To kind of pivot a little bit and go back to the interviewing process, for folks that are, you know, they've obtained the interview and they're preparing, trying to do the research beforehand, what advice do you have for, you know, top 3 recommendations for folks that are going in for a Boeing interview? I know you said the questions are fairly standard and standardized across interviewees, so top recommendations that you have as a former Boeing employee and hiring manager.
Well, I think, you know, probably, you know, for the interview process itself, Michelle, I would say the 3 things I would look at is, one, it gets back to what I said earlier, show how you solve problems. That would be my first one. That was always the first one in terms of what I was looking for. Secondly, show leadership. And that is, leadership can be anything from, you know, obviously heading a large organization to something where it's like three of you. It just shows when you show life experiences, doesn't have to necessarily be career experiences, but something where you led others. That is something that is always going to stick in the hiring manager's mind. And I would say also just finally, in terms of Boeing, and this gets into where we might put you in the future, is show how you're adaptive. It's interesting when people come in to the interview. Yes, I want to see what they can do in a particular area and that they've got experience in that area. But I'm also looking in terms of, oh, well, where could we move this person in the future based on other skill sets?
Sure.
So show that you're a little more of a Renaissance person, so to speak, in terms of that you have a variety of skills when you're coming into the interview.
Great. Yeah, those are great tips. And we actually have a follow-up question from James about the internships. He's curious if there's a rating system for veteran applicants versus college applicants. Like the federal system or the federal government will do kind of a point rating system for veteran applicants. So I believe he's trying to ask if there is any kind of system like that within Boeing that kind of recognizes veteran applicants over other applicants.
There's generally a point system within Boeing that does recognize veteran applicants. But I probably need to get you a little more detail on that, James, in terms of the internships. I'm not sure about that one. Obviously, if we've got somebody who's in college who is also a vet, I would think that probably bodes well for you. But Michelle, you know what I could do is let me do that as a follow-up question or something that I can go back into Boeing and ask them specifically for the what is it, so that I'm not misleading anybody.
Sure, that's great, and we really.
And then you can feed it back out.
Yeah, that's great. And for all of you who are viewing the VetNet Hangout today, as you can see, my email address is listed right under my name here. So if you've got a question that Mark's going to do some follow-up on, just shoot me a quick email after the VetNet closes, and I'll make sure that once Mark gets that question answered from the HR people that he knows at Boeing, I'll circle back with you. So we want to make sure to get all of your questions answered as fully as possible. This is a question that I kind of have because I know that a lot of us have assumptions going into specific industries and specific companies and jobs. So, Mark, did you find that there are any misconceptions or just assumptions that people make when they're going to work for Boeing or to work for just a major defense contractor that are incorrect or a little bit ill-informed?
Well, I don't know if ill-informed. I think what you see with any of the aerospace companies, whether it's Boeing or Lockheed, Raytheon, Airbus, whoever, that I think the perception is that if you're not an engineer, you're probably not going to get into the company, or there's no place for you. Actually, there's a rich variety of talent within the Boeing company that's not necessarily engineer-based. We've got people, as I mentioned, in all the functions, whether it's supply chain, whether it was in sales and marketing, finance, legal, that have backgrounds in those areas. I can tell you that as a sales and marketing guy, I was a political science major when I came into the Boeing company years ago. The one thing I did understand was a little bit, and it was something that I developed over the years, was decision-making process in foreign countries and how they procured things, and just learn. Most of it was learned by experience. Mm-hmm. But it's clearly these companies are engineer-driven because of the things that they do for you as the U.S. customer or other international customers, or on the commercial sides for the commercial airplanes. But that I think always the misperception is that everybody in aerospace is an engineer, and that's just not the case. It's a pretty diverse group of people bringing a variety of different backgrounds, and quite frankly, I think the leadership of the company sees that as a healthy thing. They don't want what I would call same answer for every problem. What they want is different perspectives from different voices added to the conversation, even if it's a challenge on the engineering side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very helpful. We've got another follow-up here, or just a question from one of our participants asking about kind of timeline of the application process. He said he's got some applications out there that are under consideration, but they've been under consideration for several months, some dating back to February. So is that normal or expected for the application process at Boeing? And if so, what is the general timeline that an application?
I hate to tell you this, whoever asked the question, but the answer is yes. And that gets back into, I mean, sometimes there are quick hires in the Boeing company, don't get me wrong. But as I explained at the very beginning of the conversation at the outset, there's a lot of different hoops you have to go through. I mean, there's the building of the rec, the approval of the rec, getting it out there, culling through all the interviews, or culling through all the resumes, doing the interviews, scoring the interviews, then we're actually getting basically sign off from all the functions on the hire. Before then, there's from a letter sent out, a letter of offer. So there's just a lot. There's a lot of different things that go on in the hiring process. I think sometimes, clearly as the hiring manager, I used to get a little frustrated sometimes with the length, and I know some people do. But there is the process is that way for a variety of different reasons. One, just to make sure that we've got a level playing field in terms of how we're hiring, that it is transparent, that it can withstand any kind of scrutiny, and that everybody sees this as more or less a consensus. So it does take time. I would, if you've got some resumes out there, this gets back into the whole issue of networking. If you've got some friends at Boeing or know vets at Boeing or somebody in that area, it never hurts to call and say, hey, do you know where this thing is? And you might find out that it's been a hold for money reasons or something like that. That's generally what's going on.
Sure, and I know this is a long shot, but do applicants ever get feedback from their application? We had one comment stating that he had several applications, and then after a time he would just hear that it was no longer under consideration. So are there ever possibilities to get some feedback from the HR side of the house on what they could be doing better, or is that kind of a long shot?
That's a great question, and I'll go back to the HR folks to ask. I mean, a lot of it probably depends on how many applications they are getting from different people. But I would say that if you've got a contact on the list that says this is the HR hiring, this is the HR focal, it doesn't hurt. And you got to do this. You got to be careful about how you do it. Because if it's seen as something where you're looking like you're challenging them on the selection process, then they're probably just going to sit there and say, hey, thanks very much, this goes no further. If, on the other hand, it's something where you could get a hold of the HR folk and say, hey, I just want to learn more about what I should be doing better in terms of either how I'm presenting my resume or can you give me some advice in terms of what I might do better? You might get some pretty good feedback.
Yeah, that's definitely a great idea. And keeping in line with the whole networking theme that we've got, are there any professional groups or affiliations, either on LinkedIn or independent of LinkedIn, that potential candidates should think about joining or visiting their website on a regular basis to kind of grow that network in a specific industry within Boeing or aerospace or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, there's really no like aerospace. I mean, there's an Aerospace Industry Association, but I wouldn't go there. That's more just for the companies generally on broad policy issues. I would think it generally is. You might want to look at, for example, if you've got an engineering background, whether there is some kind of local society of engineers. The same thing with people that are in legal or other functional areas. That might be the better way to go. Like, if you're in finance, look for the people that deal with finance and accounting, and that's probably the better way to try to get in and find out what's going on, not just for aerospace, obviously, but other industries as well. But there is no really what I would say aerospace umbrella organization out there that you can really tap into.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense, and that's a great recommendation. It's good to know the do's, but as well as the don'ts. So if there's not a great organization to go out there, then essentially don't waste your time. So
right.
Another great piece of advice from Mark. So thank you for that. We've got kind of a more technical question from one of our staff members about licensure. So is it possible to get an aviation mechanic position without the A&P license, even if they've had some experience within the military?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, great. That was a short answer. Wonderful.
Well, yes, because that's not my area, but I did ask the HR people about it yesterday, and they said, yep, we can.
Okay. All right, wonderful. What's the company culture like at Boeing? And again, I know that's a difficult question since it's such a large organization and there's so many different pieces that kind of have different responsibilities and missions within their sections. But I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the culture and then the importance of company culture and fitting within that once you find your next civilian career.
Yeah, well, company culture is extremely important because what you're really talking about are the habits that you want to develop as a company. Mm-hmm. Boeing is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary next year.
Oh, wow.
So 2016, they've been around for 100 years next year. And actually, and if you want to know more about Boeing, I think starting next year, PBS is going to be running a series on the Boeing company. Actually, we're sponsoring it, but it's actually what's interesting about it. It's not a Boeing commercial. It's actually when you watch it, because I've seen some of the prequels of this thing. It really tells you about the history of aviation, everything from what was going on in World War I. Through the blended wing discoveries in after the war to the the whole advent of commercial aviation and all that. So it's fascinating. Boeing itself, I mean, I would say it actually, even though it is a big organization, probably the biggest emphasis the Boeing company put on was being one Boeing. And one of the reasons is that if you looked at the company when we merged in 1996. 97, it was anything but one Boeing. We had, I always used to call it like the 12 tribes of Israel. You had the helicopter guys doing one thing, fighter guys doing another thing, commercial doing their own thing, and it took some work. But Chairman McNerney, who's probably going to retire next year, spent the better part of the last decade, I think, doing the necessary work to make it one Boeing. One thing he did was he took defense guys and put them in the commercial area, and he took commercial guys and put them in the defense area. So all of a sudden, everybody got a different perspective and kind of and move people cross-functionally as well. All of a sudden, you get people talking the same language and understanding each other's problems. And what's interesting about the Boeing company, one of the great examples was one time we had some huge issues on 787 when it first came out, which is the Dreamliner. Actually, Boeing sent about 10,000 military defense engineers up to the company to give it the necessary oomph to get the program across the line, and there was a lot of good cross-fertilization. On the other hand, one time we had some huge issues with how we were building satellites. It took a group from Boeing Commercial to come down to our facilities in El Segundo, where we build the satellites and show these guys how to kind of change their whole factory floor layout to make it more efficient. And right now, you look at satellites; it's probably one of the best businesses we have. So you're starting to see that cross-fertilization. I would say for the culture as a whole, as I mentioned, one Boeing, but it's also, it's about open culture. That is, to have the two-way communication at all times. There's no such thing as bad communications. To be inclusive, to get all those different perspectives into, how you solve problems. And third, it's about being ethical. So when I was in the international business side of things, I can tell you there were times where we walked away from a couple deals. Because we looked at the implications of what it would be in terms of the company's reputation. We walked because we knew that that was not something we were going to. That was an area where we were not going to take the company because of our reputation, which was far more important to us than the sale. So those are the things I think that Boeing, in terms of culture, has embraced. And it's why it's been around for 100 years. Hopefully, years from now we'll be celebrating its second century.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. We've got another question from Brian, and we're nearing the 40-minute mark now. So what I'm going to do is open the floor up for questions from our participants. I'll start with Brian's question, and Brian, I'll just read it off the chat, and then if I don't encapsulate what your question was, please feel free to jump in once Mark starts to answer. So Brian's question was about specific job titles. When you're looking at specific job postings within Boeing, the Boeing Corporation, what's the real difference with half versus 2/4 and 3/4? Where does the college grad with years of military experience fit senior enlisted versus officer? So I think he's asking, and again, Brian, feel free to jump in here, about, you've got applicants with military experience, and then you've got those with college degrees. So when you're looking at the different job titles, is there a way to kind of identify where you, with a bunch of military experience, would fit versus a college grad who has maybe the education but not so many years of experience to back that up?
That's a great question. I would say there probably isn't. And I say that because Boeing, when we bring you in, as I said earlier, we know that there's experiences that you're going to have and lots of gaps. You're just going to have, anybody we hire has gaps. And what Boeing's job is to do is help you fill the gaps. So I think military experience is a huge asset, and it gets back into what I was saying earlier about leadership. There aren't too many people in the military that aren't leaders in some way, shape, or form, and that's going to bode well for you versus, quite frankly, a guy from college that's got a particular skill set, but probably not a lot of experience or a lot of leadership. So I'm not sure in terms of the job titles themselves that they lend themselves to how you would look at. I would my experience would be look at the rec, see how if you look at it, you go, actually I've got logistics experience. Interesting. I talked to a guy the other day. We were talking about it. It was logistics. It was a guy from Hire Heroes. He had logistics experience. He wanted to get into IT. And I said, well, that's interesting because if you look at where logistics is going, there's a lot of IT to it. And I said, if you look at Boeing, it's got logistics information management systems. So we kind of helped him in terms of trying to find at least somebody to talk to over there. And I think you got to kind of look at your skill set and say how it blends into what that particular rec is and how you can more or less highlight those things where your particular skills are going to shine through. I hope that answers the question.
Well, and he wrote a little bit of follow-up. So when you see titles like Specialist 1, Specialist 2, is there a rhyme or reason to experience levels?
Yeah, they do. They've got you've got specialist one obviously is entry level, so there's going to be a certain. I mean, the thing on an S1, look at the salary requirements on that. A specialist too. But generally, if somebody's the other end is looking at your experience and saying, well, okay, so this guy's got 10 years in the military. Let's see. He's probably not a specialist one. He might be a specialist 3. Now, you might not qualify for that job because they're looking at it saying, well, he's almost overqualified. But what they might do is say, this guy's got a great resume. We probably want to take a look at this S3 position that we've got opening up here in the next week or so and put it in that queue.
Okay, so hiring managers will take the time to try and fit the right applicants into the right position.
Yeah, a lot of times if they see something where all of a sudden most hiring managers got open recs on, they don't have one open rec, they have many open recs.
Sure.
And their job, they're trying to get through this process too. I mean, so
right.
And they want to do it right the first time.
Sure.
They do not want to come back 6 months later or a year later and then have somebody that just doesn't fit. So if they do see a resume and say, this guy's probably not for this job, but I think he might be a good fit in that, I'd like to see what he's got, chances are they're going to tell the HR person, okay, so let's put that guy's resume in this particular pile because when we open this rec next week, we'll want to consider that one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do any of our other participants, or I see we've got a couple of Hire Hero staff members listening in as well, does anyone have any other questions for Mark before we sign off for today's VetNet session? If so, please unmute your mic. Feel free to ask.
I wanted to circle back to that under consideration thing, and I understood all about, it's going to take 3-4 months to get from rec to interview to hire. I guess what I was asking is a lot of the applications I've put in have been, a few of them have been put not considered. But the other ones, like with reference to the February that's sitting under consideration, I haven't seen any interviews yet, so I just kind of wonder, not that I'm sitting here waiting for a rec from
right
or an application from February, but I'm just wondering. I gotta believe they've moved on by now. How come it's still sitting on?
Well, I'll tell you what. If you want to do me a favor, and Michelle, if you could help, this is with Boeing.
Yes.
Why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? If you get with Michelle, get me your email address, send me what it is, and let me see what I can find out for you. That might probably be the easiest way. It might be. My guess is it's probably if it's being held for something like that. It's probably budget related. Can you tell me what area it was?
It was manufacturing.
You know where?
Some in Everett, mostly around the Sound area.
Okay, so it was commercial?
Mostly commercial and a couple of the defense ones.
Okay. Send it to me. Let me do some checking for you. That might be the easiest way, and I can find out for you.
Okay, fantastic.
Sure. Russ, so just send me an email, and I'll get you and Mark connected offline.
Yeah.
Is your email anywhere?
Yes. So if you see on the screen, my email address is right there, mweisner@hireheroesusa.org. I'll type it in the chat box as well, so you can just click the hyperlink for your email address.
Oh, your screen's blacked out, so I can't see it.
Oh. Well, then I'll type it in the chat box so everyone...
Now you're back.
Sorry, gotta love the slow internet connection. Does anyone else have any other questions for Mark before we sign off for today? All right, well, I'm going to take that to mean that...
One more in there. I was going to let somebody else go.
Yeah, sure.
With respect to the networking stuff, I guess I've seen some stuff. Some guys will try to look around and find out stuff for me and not get responses, or so they say. Or some guys, I don't even know if they're actually doing anything. I just wonder how how good is the employee referral / hey Bob, take a look at this resume and tell me what you think? With respect to
It actually it is effective. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be on the list, but I guarantee you, usually if one of my colleagues called me and said, "Hey, would you please take a look at the resume?" I'd always take a look at the resume, because chances are I would do the same. I'd ask them to do the same thing for me, and so I would. Now I'd call them. I might call them back and say, "You know what? There's no fit here," and I'd always do that. Or I'd say, "You know what? That actually is pretty good. Let's, we're going to give this guy a shot and see what, see how he does in an interview process." Or, but I'd always make sure that there was a follow-up. So I think employee referrals, they're not. It doesn't mean you've got a surefire, or surefire way of getting in. But I think they do help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, better than nothing, right?
Yeah, no. Well, more than nothing. I think actually they can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, Mark, we really appreciate your time and attention today and going through our list of questions. We sincerely appreciate it. For all of you who are participating, Mark is a volunteer with Hire Heroes USA, so if you think of something after the VetNet session, please just shoot me an email and we can get you connected with Mark. Please stay tuned. We always do these VetNet classes on Wednesdays from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, so stay tuned to our channel on Google+, and all of these classes are posted to YouTube afterwards in case you miss anything or you want to share something with your friends and family who are also in the job search. So thank you guys very much for your attention, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.